Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emma Borden, and I'm the Associate Director of RAND's Center for the Geopolitics of AGI and a Senior Policy Analyst here at RAND. Our center brings together experts across technology, strategy, economics, national security, and other disciplines to understand how the potential emergence of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, could shape the world and to help decision makers anticipate and prepare for those potential impacts. Notably, there are many debates about the definition of AGI and how we should define it. But here in our center, we use the term to refer to an AI system or systems capable of achieving human levels of cognition across most economically and militarily relevant tasks. If realized, the implications of this technology would be profound, affecting everything from defense planning and the global economy to our alliances and partnerships and broader geopolitical dynamics, just to name a few. As this technology evolves at an incredibly fast pace, it's critical that policymakers, businesses, and society as a whole are prepared to navigate as best we can and shape the era of advanced AI. Today's program is a great example of the cross-disciplinary and forward-looking work happening here at RAND on this issue, and we're excited to share insights from our research with all of you, so thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I have a couple housekeeping items. First, we'll have time at the end for questions during a short question and answer session with our experts, so please post questions about the research in the Q&A feature. Second, we'll post links relevant to today's discussion and presentation in the chat, so please be sure to keep an eye out for those. Okay, so now to turn to the reason we're all here today. Our speakers are two leading research experts in emerging technology and national security. First, we're joined by Jim Mitre. Jim is the inaugural Vice President and Director of RAND's Global and Emerging Risks Division, and the Center for the Geopolitics of AGI is housed within this division at RAND. Welcome, Jim. Next, we have Joel Predd. Joel directs RAND's Center for the Geopolitics of AGI and is a senior engineer here at RAND. His research focuses on AI's impacts on international affairs and US-China security and economic competition. Thanks for joining us, Joel. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim and Joel for their presentation, and we'll be back at the end for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Emma. Frontier AI laboratories are now aiming to build systems that match or exceed human cognitive performance across nearly all economically valuable tasks. This goal is pursued seriously, backed by billions of dollars in sustained global research effort. A decade ago, most experts doubted such systems were achievable. Today, many believe they could emerge within the next decade. Whether or not those forecasts prove accurate, their growing technical credibility warrants attention. For the United States, this is not merely a technology policy question. It is an issue of national preparedness. If developed, general-purpose intelligence systems could trigger shifts in productivity and power reminiscent of the Industrial Revolution, though compressed into timescales measured not in centuries, but in decades or even years. At RAND, we've established a center on the geopolitics of AGI that is organized around one central question. How should the US government address the potential emergence of AGI? Our research explores plausible geopolitical, strategic, and operational consequences on the path to and in post-AGI futures, and develops strategies, capabilities, and policy options relevant to multiple futures. This approach reflects RAND's use of the analytic methodology decision-making under deep uncertainty, identifying strategies that remain sound across a wide range of possible world conditions. The unusual feature of this moment is that the technologists themselves are calling for the national security community to look ahead. Many in Silicon Valley now recognize that they are developing systems with potentially significant geopolitical and national security consequences, but they are far less equipped to imagine those consequences. Conversely, national security strategists and policymakers, largely concentrated in Washington, D.C., may understand issues such as deterrence and crisis management, but lack technical grounding in AI development. Our initiative seeks to bridge these two communities, drawing on relevant expertise from technologists and strategists alike. Moreover, to grapple with the complexity and ubiquity of advanced AI or AGI across geopolitical and national security topics, we must span the intellectual stack. We therefore have on the team technologists and capability developers to understand and validate the trajectory of AI progress, as well as to enable effective use of AI tools in our research. Political scientists and economists to analyze incentives, market dynamics, and state competition. International relations and regional experts to assess implications for alliances and geopolitical stability, as well as strategists and historians to draw lessons from prior technology race conditions and apply their tradecraft to devising new strategies. This cross-disciplinary structure enables assessment of AGI's impact on global security that are necessarily speculative, yet analytically rigorous. AGI may or may not arrive soon. Its pathways remain uncertain. Our responsibility at RAND is to prepare thoughtfully, to ensure that the US government and its allies and partners can act wisely under uncertainty, and to ensure AGI does not arise, to ensure that if AGI arises, we don't stumble into such a future analytically bankrupt. With that, I'll pass to Joel to get into the body of the brief.
Thanks, Jim, and really delighted to share some of our the work from our center today. If I could ask you to go to the next slide. Jim has done a very good job of setting up our overarching research question, which is what should governments, businesses, and civil society do about the prospect of artificial general intelligence? And to give you a sense of the broad scope of the center to get after it. Today, I want to give you a bit of share some of our work on trying to diagnose the most basic implications of what this would mean for national security and geopolitics. I want to begin with the idea that the prospect of AGI for us is a premise, not a prediction. And there are several reasons why that we should take it as a technically plausible possibility, without having to make firm predictions about when, whether, and if. One of the reasons is that we can see consistent improvements in the frontier model performance, and they come out each day. Just yesterday or this week, time moves quickly. We've seen new releases from multiple frontier labs. The competition is stiff within companies at home in the United States, but also companies abroad, for example, in China. This creates an incredible incentive for these firms to race to advance the frontier, which, as many of you know, is measured in very large capital investments, billions, if not trillions of dollars. What's more, the scientists at the frontier within the labs and in academia, although they don't all agree, there are experts who suggest that this technical threshold, as Jim defined it, AGI, that has the potential to replace human cognition on all or most of all economically and militarily relevant tasks, is possible. Furthermore, that form of AI may gain enough agency to pursue goals autonomously, and it is possible that it could begin to learn continuously and begin a process of self-improvement. We accept these as technically plausible possibilities, not certainties for our work. Next slide. Given this possibility, we believe there is good reasons for the US government to plan around it, not as a certainty, but as a possibility. Among other things to observe here, the US government today is not developing AI. It has a strategy at present that is seeking to lead in AI leadership. Example in many ways, including semiconductor export controls, among others. But it is, for the most part, focused on where the puck is today, not looking at what some of these alternative AI futures would look like. And so the premise of our work is investing to develop some of the intellectual capital that would be needed in a moment when the US government is prepared to take these possibilities or required to take these possibilities more seriously than we are today. Next slide. The topic of AGI is somewhat abstract, and that some of the definitions that Emma, Jim, or I have offered you are perhaps not helpful. So it may be useful to think of a more concrete manifestation of it, which I'll offer on this slide. Imagine the possibility that a state actor, for example, the US government or the Chinese Communist Party, or some non-state actor, for example, had access to an AI that could effectively replicate 1 million expert-level computer programmers, constrained only by the amount of compute or energy that we could provide them. And each of them is capable of performing at the top level, to the top end of human performers. What would that equip that government, that non-state actor, to be able to do? It is not hard to imagine dramatic implications for cybersecurity, among other things, in the military balance and national security. This definition, this more concrete definition, is just a narrow representation of what AI of the form that interests us could take, but it is a particularly evocative one. Next slide. So this is our one research question. What should the US government do about the potential emergence of AGI? Not as a certainty, but as a possibility that is on our horizon. Now, when we began this effort about 18 months ago, we observed many concrete answers to this question. There are those that have proposed Manhattan projects or Apollo programs and other joint projects between the US government and industry. There are those that advocate for industrial policies to strengthen our semiconductor ecosystem at home or with allies. There are those that propose AI governance proposals like AI Baruch plans, or means to evaluate frontier model for their security or safety implications. There are many proposals on the table, but one of the most fundamental questions that are left unanswered is what exactly is the problem that we're trying to be solved. Now, should be well understood for any strategist that defining strategy requires us to be transparent and explicit about our objectives, but defining the objectives requires a diagnosis of the problems we're trying to solve and the environment that we're operating in. And it is apparent to us that we, in this community, in the two communities that Jim referenced, the AI community and the national security community, even those of us who take this very seriously, often arrive at a convening like this with different conceptions or different priors about what the most central challenges and opportunities with AGI might be. Some of us may be concerned about AGI as a source of decisive strategic advantage in the context of an economic, science and technology, or military competition with China. Others may be worried about super empowering non-state actors to create bioweapons or other dangerous capabilities. Others may be more concerned about the ultimate risk of independent AGI agents that gain enough autonomy and agency to threaten our national and human interests more generally. Still, others are worried about instability in the global security environment as actors like the United States or China take actions to preserve or protect or prevent others' progress. In fact, AGI represents all of these challenges, and so we think a first step in addressing this research question, next slide, is to develop a common diagnosis of the spaces of challenges and opportunities, since solutions to one of these problems may have implications for others. I would like to walk through this presentation of these 5 hard problems, and there's a paper that we've written that goes through them. In doing so, I want to describe the problem, but up front, I want to acknowledge that embedded within each of these problems are also opportunities. For example, the United States could be the actor that gains the strategic advantage, as we'll talk about in a moment, or there could be a wonder weapon that presents a strategic offset. And so while we're framing these as problems, and indeed there are risks, embedded within them are also our opportunities. So if we could, I'll walk through these 5 hard problems. Next slide. The first problem that we see, we refer to as the possibility of a state with a wonder weapon. A wonder weapon, as we think about it, is a military capability that very rapidly and discontinuously affects the military balance. It need not provide the actor in possession of that capability hegemonic power, just like nuclear weapons don't provide an actor in possession of the hegemonic power, but it would provide enormous disruption to the military balance, perhaps undermining stability or the foundations of deterrence. How might AGI contribute to that? Well, AGI has the potential to dramatically affect the rate at which we innovate. We can imagine, to use a metaphor that some of the leaders in the frontier AI labs have used, a data center full of geniuses. And whether that materializes or not, and whether AI is simply as an accelerant of our own human-led science and innovation, there is the possibility that we see a dramatic acceleration of the innovation process, yielding weapons that at present we may difficult to imagine. Some of the examples on this slide are concrete and very imaginable. We can imagine a cyber capability, an offensive cyber capability that automates network reconnaissance, discovers vulnerabilities at scale, tests and creates and tests exploits, and automates the cyber kill chain, so to speak, that yields to attacks at a scale and speed that we can't imagine. It could be represented as a superior military strategist that's advising operational and potentially strategic planners on courses of action. Or it could be represented in autonomous weapon systems. In any of these cases, there are big questions that we should be asking. Would such a wonder weapon present a first mover advantage? Could we rely on the nuclear backstop in a world with such a weapon as the remaining bedrock of deterrence? And how should we posture our national security enterprise to avoid an AGI Pearl Harbor? How can we prevent if we cannot deter it? Next slide. The second problem we have in mind is something that might be more gradual. If the wonder weapon problem, by definition or by framing, is something that occurs over weeks, months, or a small number of years, a systemic shift in the instruments of national power might happen more gradually. We're not talking about a shift that happens on an intergenerational timescale. It could be quite fast, say 5 or 10 years. And in the analogy that might be useful to reference here might be the Industrial Revolution, but compressed into a decade or less. The idea here is that states that embrace the transformative potential of artificial general intelligence could see accelerated S&T, yielding new innovations that underwrite their economy, yielding explosive innovation growth, economic growth. It could disrupt their militarily, not through a wonder weapon, but just in the way that AI could greatly empower militaries, conventional militaries, to yield decisive advantages. Or societies that embrace this could find new foundations for renewed forms of national competitiveness. In this world, states that embrace AGI could flourish, and states that do not could languish. There could be a systemic shift in the instruments of power that alters the global power balance. There are many, many questions that we should be answering, and our team is. Among them, how would we manage the systemic disruptions to our own society or to the global balance of power in the event that something like this happens? When an AGI like this affects the building block competitions of the military, how would they do so, and what are the big bets that our military should be making now in anticipation? There are many questions about this problem, a systemic shift in the basis of power. Next question. The third problem that we see is the possibility that AGI acts as a kind of malicious mentor for non-state actors, empowering non-experts to create new weapons of mass destruction. There are examples of this, we're well aware, like the Shcherenko sarin attack, and it is easiest to imagine this happening in the biological weapon regime or in cyber weapons, where cognitive bottlenecks or being organic to the digital domain are the primary limiting factors, and AGI may be very effective here. There are many questions that we should be thinking about in this space. Among them, what are the indicators that AGI is capable enough to get to that threshold? How can we make our governments, our society, and institutions resilient to these forms of attack? Since this is an area where it would seem that global powers like the United States and China have incentives to collaborate, how might they do so? How do we deal with the reality that humans ultimately kill people even if AI does not, or especially when AI does not? The next slide. The fourth problem that we see is the one most closely associated with the scientific or science fiction versions of the AGI story. But I don't think that we need to go to Westworld to take this problem seriously. The problem is the possibility that the AGI that we've designed and given agency to operate our critical infrastructure or order our pizzas gains enough agency or autonomy to be considered an independent actor on the world stage. There are many ways that this could happen. We don't necessarily need to have a super intelligence, a singular super intelligence in a data center to be concerned about this. It could simply be AI embedded in our critical infrastructure that it optimizes on narrowly defined objectives. Within that, it could be a system that develops its own objectives. It could be that AI is just so integrated into our society that it disempowers us in some way. Not necessarily maliciously, but simply that we gain enough dependency on it that is it in some level explicitly or implicitly competing with us or our allies. Again, we think that this is a problem that needs to be taken seriously because some of our research has shown, some of the scenarios in which this becomes problematic, it may be difficult to differentiate a rogue AI agent embedded in our critical infrastructure from a problem of a state actor attacking us with cyber weapons. Next slide. The final problem on our list of 5 is perhaps the most urgent one, which is the prospect of instability. What might states in pursuit of this technology or observing others in pursuit of this technology do, acting out aggressively to prevent or preserve their progress toward an AGI monopoly? Now, we are already seeing this kinds of preventive actions in the context of the strategic competition between the United States and China. This has to do with export controls and tariffs and other things. The question is where does that path lead? Preventive wars are rare in our history and should not be assumed by any chance. But if we're talking about a technology that has the kind of stakes that are represented in the other 4 problems, we can imagine scenarios in which preventive wars are on the menu. There are other options, though. There are simply options that don't yield into war, but fierce competition or new opportunities for deal making. And the analogy here, of course, is the race for nuclear weapons, which is a history that we know very well. Next slide. So, in summary of these 5 problems, unfortunately, we don't get to choose. All of these problems are on the menu, and we believe that a U.S. national security strategy should use these problems as a kind of rubric to evaluate priorities and trade-offs. There are tensions between them. For example, a strategy that's designed to accelerate to our first mover advantage for the economy may incentivize states or firms to develop or adopt AI recklessly, leading to rogue AI agents or instabilities. It's also possible that a strategy that prioritizes safety or constrains its development out of concern for the most dire risks undermines our competitive advantage geopolitically. These are some of the most basic tensions that any strategist taking AGI seriously must confront. Next slide. Now, you might wonder, we've done a great job of admiring the problem. What are we doing to solve it? This is not the presentation to talk about that, but we'll talk briefly in the last slide in this presentation about the elements of a robust U.S. government strategy that is taking such possibilities seriously. Many of these are familiar objectives: preventing technology surprise, promoting our leadership in the global AI stack, protecting our leadership by, among other things, denying others from stealing our secrets, propagating AI within the U.S. government, particularly to ensure our national security. Perhaps the element on this that is least embraced today is the last one in the bottom right-hand corner, which is preparing for a wide range of possibilities. Indeed, some of the problems that we've mentioned today are not on the agenda for strategy and policymakers. And whether or not we take this, whatever our predictions are about these futures, we believe that the state of the technologies that we should take them seriously. And that is a call for more serious strategy and planning. And I believe that's it. Well, happy to talk. Jim and I and Emma are happy to talk about questions.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Jim. And as my colleague mentioned in the chat, please do use the Q&A function for our participants. We have already a few questions in the queue, so I'll get started with those and look forward to others putting their questions on this research, submitting those questions through this function. But first, to start, we have a question about the development of AI models. And the participant asks, or states that current models are only improving on quote unquote word scraping and not actually getting closer to actual human-like cognition. So they ask, do you, Jim or Joel, anticipate there will be a dramatic revolution where AI cognition is developed, or will AGI more likely come about through a form of pseudo-cognition where there's not true cognition, but just the appearance thereof? Happy to start with either of you, if either wants to jump in.
I can take a first swing. Jim, I think the unfortunate reality is that we don't know. Unlike the scientists at Los Alamos that had physics to rely on when they ran the calculation, that gave them confidence that we could do the Trinity test without igniting the atmosphere, we simply do not have that level of cognitive science or otherwise to give us the kind of confidence in the predictions you're asking us to make. It is a possibility, it seems to us, a technically credible possibility that an artificial intelligence with the kind of generality and autonomy we're talking about could emerge in the current technical paradigm of hyperscaling multimodal transformer models. It is also possible that this will present a fundamental roadblock that will not allow us to get to that point, and some fundamentally different technical paradigm would be required. Physical embodiment, brain-inspired AI, neuromorphic computing. It's also possible that something like general intelligence emerges not as a singular model, but as a sort of an aggregate of many more specialized models diffused across the global AI ecosystem. So it is very fashionable in the AI community to offer forecasts, and certainly those are useful insofar as they can represent experts' opinion. From our perspective, we should be debating options, not odds, given the uncertainties.
Joel, well put. I don't have much to add. The only thing I'll note just on the concept of word scraping, I think one way that's helpful to think about these models is not as a unique standalone thing, but as a system of systems, in the sense that the models are increasingly able to engage with tools. So they can call up a calculator if helpful. They have the ability to engage on the internet, surf the internet, engage in the digital sphere through embodied intelligence and the pairing of AI with robots, increasingly able to engage in the physical world as well. So I would think about them in a broader context of like system of systems in terms of how they're being developed, not just next token predictors, and that's the end of it.
Thank you both. We have a few questions that have come in about international cooperation and sort of different kinds of actors, different categories of state actors on this issue of AGI and international cooperation. So maybe a two-part question here. One is there's already well-established structures in place for international cooperation on both opportunities and risks in the scientific domain. So interested in your thoughts on how those mechanisms might be usefully employed to tackle the challenges of and sort of capitalize on the opportunities that AGI might present. And then part two of that question, so somewhat relatedly, one of our participants notes that at present, the United States and China seem to be the two state actors that are most likely to achieve AGI, cross this undefined threshold of AGI first, and maybe the only ones who might get there in the near future. So how should other countries be thinking about these challenges or opportunities, other countries beyond the United States and China? So maybe I'll leave it at that two-part question for now.
Jim, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I have some thoughts on the US-China dynamic when it comes to cooperation, because I think there are some potential areas there that would be interesting. In particular, when it comes to incident response sharing or potentially sharing best practice in terms of AI security, AI control to get at misalignment dynamics. So there are some avenues there for potential cooperation beyond where we currently stand. Now, when it comes to leveraging existing institutions in the national community, I don't know enough about them to say, with any confidence what might work or not there. But just conceptually, I think there are areas for potential cooperation, particularly with the U.S. and China on this. Now, in terms of how other nations can get engaged in this, I think the reality is some of the challenges that advanced AI, AGI is going to present are potentially going to create negative externalities that ripple across the world, that aren't isolated just within the US and China. When it comes to things like misuse risks, when it comes to things like potential rogue AI or loss of control dynamics. And so these are some problems that everybody has an interest in addressing. And so there are roles for countries around the world to similarly identify how is AI taking root within their society, what are some of the potential incidents that they're seeing, and sharing information on that, what are best practices that they should be thinking about in terms of managing AI's adoption such that you're able to effectively guard against some of these significant negative externalities.
I would add only one point, which is to say one of the interesting features, I guess, or observations of working in this space is that when you're outside of the AI world and national security world, when you're operating outside that, there's a conventional narrative that we're converging to a very multipolar world. And when you're inside the AI world, in which the US and China are the leading poles on this global AI stack, it would seem that we're moving to a very bipolar world. And so one of the questions that I think we have to confront is when we reconcile the intersection of AI and national security, is how do we think about those two different trajectories?
Thank you. There have been a few questions in the chat as well about sort of AGI interacting with the domestic situation in the United States and the possibility for economic disruption, or the possibility that beyond disruption, AGI could in many ways eliminate the need for human labor as we've conceived of it to date. While this project is focused on the geopolitics of AGI, I wonder if either of you might be able to speak to how the center considers questions of economic disruption or general stability and instability globally, but also in domestic contexts, be that in the United States, Europe, or other parts around the world.
So you're right, Emma. We do not look at we are not focused principally on the implications of transformative forms of AI for the economy. Critically important work, and some of our collaborators outside of RAND are looking at that more squarely. And in fact, some of our collaborators within RAND and other parts of RAND are thinking about that. Are interested in that would be strictly through the implications, as you're suggesting, those low economic instabilities for national security. And it does seem like they could be substantial. The prospect for civil unrest, political upheaval, among other things, due to economic dislocation at home and abroad seems very real. Interestingly, when we think about this in geopolitical terms, one question we can ask is whether that shared problem would be a reason among potentially other reasons for states that would otherwise be competing to collaborate on governing this. On the one hand, states that are more capable or effective at managing those economic dislocations could gain substantial strategic advantage. On the other hand, the scope of the economic dislocation could be such that it could be in the mutual interest to figure out how to work through those transitions, economic transitions together. That's a really important open question.
Yeah, and I'll just add that some of our colleagues, Mike Mazar and Anka Agachi, just put out a report this past week that looks at some of the challenges that U.S. government has in developing strategy for AGI, and proposes a few alternative strategies to consider. One of the issues they really hit on is the importance of trying to maximize the benefits of AI for all. Because of these types of dynamics, if we find ourselves in a position where there are a large segment of the U.S., for example, that is all of a sudden significant disruption to labor markets, that could lead to a significant degree of instability. I mean, history of political unrest suggests that young, highly educated, unemployed folks that don't see a future for themselves in the country can look to try to change the order, right? And at the extreme, that can lead to revolution. I'm not saying that we're on that path there, but I am saying if there is a world where there is a large number of highly educated, unemployed Americans, that's going to cause a lot of challenges. So we do need to think about how to maximize some of the benefits for that community.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to our colleague for linking the report you referenced that Mike and Anka just put out in the chat. So would encourage participants to look there. There have also been 2 or 3 questions about the role of policy, I will assume here, federal policymaking, and the relationships between the U.S. government and the leading AI labs, and how each of them, what levers each of them might exercise in order to reduce the national security risks, and perhaps, although outside of the scope of the center, as you both said, perhaps increase the benefits in terms of economic prosperity and so on. I was wondering, maybe first to Joel, if you could speak a little bit to what the center's research has indicated about the importance of public-private partnerships. And I know that parts of the center have been running some tabletop exercises that might offer some insights into what sort of productive relationships between public and private sectors might be able to yield in terms of mitigating the national security or geopolitical risks.
It's a really great question. So as Emma alluded, we have a large body of work led by our colleagues Rich Gervin and Greg Smith that is trying to get insight on how governments should prepare for events that we are plausible will encounter on the path to some of these more transformative AI futures. That is to say, we're thinking about this as the day after AGI, in which events happen that are both crises to U.S. national security and signposts that futures we may be skeptical about yesterday are more plausible today. To connect this with the question, one of the recurring insights that emerges from this is the need for some sort of dynamic and scalable relationship between the U.S. government and frontier AI labs, hyperscalers, among other things. And there's several reasons why such a dynamic and scalable relationship would be needed. First, would be very useful for that relationship to exist for mere situational awareness on what the frontier AI companies are producing. It would be very bad if the U.S. government is informed at the same time about the latest model release as we are. And so there's a need to get previews as far in advance of what kinds of capabilities are coming out of the frontier labs next. The second reason is for experimentation. The U.S. government, the U.S. military, the U.S. national security community in general should be thinking about ways to use this capability for our own strategic advantage, and a relationship with the frontier labs is a means to experiment with this in advance so that we can both capitalize on it for our own advantage, but reduce the prospect of technical surprise. Other reasons to involve this for such a relationship is the security implications. Given the value economically, militarily, and otherwise of these frontier model capabilities, they are of great interest to our geopolitical competitors. And of course, the U.S. government has resources and capabilities that could be very useful in securing the model weights, the infrastructure the deployments of these frontier model capabilities. Some of these are just no regret forms of relationships, but you can also imagine the need to dramatically scale up or scale down the relationship between the U.S. government and AI companies in the moment of crisis. And that's why the dynamic and scalable part of that public-private partnership is really important. You wouldn't want to be starting from scratch when you're in a moment when you really need a tight relationship.
Maybe just a minor point to add to that. In a lot of our exercises where we look at potential AGI-enabled crises and how the government should respond to them, we quickly find that there's a host of technical questions that emerge immediately. Is this a bioattack? How much of it is enabled by AI? If there's some terrorists or other criminal organizations doing things that are nefarious, like how much of this is just a criminal problem versus an AI-enabled criminal problem? So it gets murky, right? And because the technology is not being developed by the U.S. government, folks in government's ability to really understand some of the technical facets here is not especially deep. And so you need to connect with the technologists that are at the forefront of developing it to just get a basic understanding of what's happening with the technology, how much of it is responsible for a particular event or crisis problem that government's grappling with. And to the extent that it is, if it can do one thing, what does it mean about what else it can do? And how government needs to prepare for not just to handle the crisis at the moment, but for the new world that we're now in if AI is past a particular threshold. So the importance of that collaboration is absolutely critical, just at a minimum to understand what's going on with the technology and what the broader national security implications are.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've had a few questions about well, maybe speaking of technical challenges, we've had a few questions in the Q&A box about the challenges of alignment, bias in AI systems, and potentially in AGI system or systems, what that means in our current political context. Again, I know that these sorts of technical challenges of alignment or misalignment and embedding values in systems is not necessarily the focus of the center's work, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how we think about values and alignment in terms of U.S. leadership of this technology. And as we've spoken about a little bit over the past 45 minutes, we've talked about, the U.S.-China dynamics in particular. And I think implicit in a number of the concerns about U.S. leadership on this technology is not only that we want to have our industry and have our government lead, but also that we are competing and in some cases in a race against China for that leadership position. So was wondering if I could sort of draw on these questions, but bring them up a notch to sort of the geopolitical level, and interested in both of your thoughts on the U.S.-China competition in this space in particular.
Yeah, I can start on this one, Joel, if you want to chime in. The chief AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, has a great line on this, which is that if 80% of the world's tech stack is running on US technology, that's winning. If 80% of the world is using the Chinese tech stack, that's losing. And that matters not just for economic reasons. It matters because Chinese enabled AI potentially can entrench authoritarian values as opposed to democratic Western values. What does that mean? That means that there's greater ability to censor people in the society that are using Chinese AI systems, greater ability to promote Chinese propaganda in a way that is counter to U.S. and Western interests. And so these are real dynamics that we're going to be confronted with, and I think is really part of the reason why it's important to win not just the tech race, if you will, at home here in the U.S. Relative to Chinese models, but for the global race, and make sure that the vast majority of the world is not working off of authoritarian AI models.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and this gets to again, some of the themes that we've hit on before. And I'm interpreting a little bit this question. The participant writes, how do you see AI literacy in national security? And I think here I'm going to add sort of my own flavor on top of this question, which is you both have been at this for almost 2 years now, as I understand it, and come at the question or the challenge of AGI from more of a national security background than a technology policy one, or a technological one. So interested in your views on how the discourse around AGI and national security circles has evolved. Hopefully it's improved and literacy has improved, but would be interested in your take on whether that's really the case.
I can go first. A few different reactions to this question. I think there's general AI literacy, and then there's the kind of awareness and appreciation for the implications and options available in the most transformative AI that we're talking about here. On the first, although it is not our focus, it does seem to me at least that the government's awareness of what you might call narrow AI is strong and increasing. And there's many indications of this in all agencies. In the context of the most transformative forms of AGI that we take as a premise, as a technically plausible premise, not necessarily as a firm prediction. I think we have transitioned from a world where it was not on the menu at all to where it's at least recognized in some quarters as a possibility. One of the metaphors that I find useful here is our work is really about skating to where the puck is going, not where it is. And if I embrace that metaphor about AGI and ASI, I think there's at least a greater awareness that there is a puck when it comes to AGI and ASI, but there's much work to be done to think about what the next 2, 5, 10 years are coming. But Jim, you have a lot of experience in the Pentagon leading organizations that are doing this, so you surely have more insights.
No, I think that's exactly right. I would just add that it's still a very nascent field. And so there's not as much depth on thinking about this. And so people who are getting into it, there's plenty of opportunity to quickly get up to speed on these issues and contribute to the debate and the discussion on it. And so one of the things I've noticed just as folks have left government, where they were focused very much on applying narrow AI to existing government systems, military systems, and the like, is there's been this kind of learning experience to get out of government, spend more time working with these tools, spend time engaging with folks out in Silicon Valley. And that process of just getting up to speed on where the tech is has really opened up a lot of their minds. So there's no substitute for just meditating on these issues and playing with the technology. I do think there's a challenge with folks who are in government for extended period of time, just not having access to it in the same way and not really having the bandwidth to be able to meditate on it in the same way, that is limiting government's ability to really get their head around this issue. But the good news is there is, as Joel said, at least a little bit more of an awakening on the importance of this as a potential to be grappled with seriously.
Thank you. I think there have been a few additional questions on sort of the extent of the tensions over AGI and control of AGI in terms of what resources might be available to populations around the world beyond the United States and China, and whether we have the mechanisms in place to navigate these increased tensions. I think it's fair to say that those mechanisms are being challenged already, even prior to a world in which AGI or ASI has entered. But interested in your thoughts on and your insights into what the center's research is revealing about, whether we will be able to retool the current mechanisms to meet the challenges that Joel described in the 5 hard problems, or if we think that doing away with those mechanisms and rethinking the international governance frameworks overall might be required. And I expect it's a little bit of both on the path to AGI, but I want to hear from the experts.
The most important finding from our work so far, when it comes again to the most transformative forms of AI that we're taking as a premise, not as a prediction, is that we are completely unprepared. Full stop. We've run now thousands of hours of these day after exercises and many other war games, not to mention the many other just more traditional desk research we've done. And there is essentially very, very little evidence that we are prepared to use existing instruments of power and control or alternative instruments of power or control to manage these crises. Now, for better or worse, given that level of unpreparedness, we are probably going to we may be entering a world where our strategy emerges as a response to events as opposed to some top-down analytic process. That just may be the nature of a technology that is rapidly progressing and outstripping our capacity to govern it, which I think is a motivation in part for our work to whether or not we institutionalize new governance mechanisms in advance, we develop playbooks, break glass plans, capabilities, communication mechanisms, et cetera, so that in a moment when we need them, they are available. Jim, you may have other reactions.
No, I totally agree. What I'd add, though, is there's not a major difference between a lot of the things the government is doing now and a lot of the things the government would want to have in position if AGI emerges in order to extract the benefits of advanced AI or AGI. So for example, if you think about AI systems, trying to get an AI system in the defense ecosystem right now it's like trying to plant a tree on Mars, right? That you just don't have the broader digital ecosystem in place in terms of access to relevant data, the ability to integrate large swaths of data, et cetera. So those types of steps that the government is focused on taking right now will enable the government to be better positioned to exploit advanced AI or AGI in future. So it's not that it's wholly off track. There's actually a lot of reinforcing benefits by government's effort to become more digital and more AI enabled.
Great, thank you. Maybe a last question, if I might. And I was thinking of trying to end on an encouraging note, but I also think that there's a lot of important challenges, and as Joel said, ones that we can't quite anticipate and therefore can't be prepared for, even if we have the mechanisms to respond as best we can, and agile mechanisms to do that. So maybe going back to the core presentation that this hour has been organized around. Joel, you mentioned that solutions to some of the 5 problems may present challenges to others, or as you put it in the written report, as both of you put it, you, quote, have observed that proposals to advance progress on one problem can undermine progress if not outright ignore another, end quote. And Joel, I think you closed with a few examples, but which tensions or trade-offs, either among those 5 problems or others, concern you most, or keep you up at night, or are you able to sleep well because RAND is on the case?
I'll leave my sleep habits off the agenda here, but to zoom way out, I am increasingly convinced that the core tension in thinking about strategies for these most transformative forms of AI is the tension between thinking about this as a threshold moment for our species, for humanity, if you will, and it being a threshold moment for our geopolitics. Fundamentally, it's both. But your responses to this form of technology would be very different depending on which view you take. And I think you have many folks who represent the AI community, disparate factions within the AI community, the accelerationists or the doomers, if you will, both share the view that this is a threshold moment for our humanity. They just have different responses to it. And on the other hand, I think the national security community is prone to think about it as a source of competition, disadvantage, strength, stability in the geopolitical competition. And again, the reality is it's both, and the most fundamental tension is trying to figure out a way that respects both.
I can't improve on that, but I'd offer an interesting dynamic here from my vantage is how it's easy to fall in the trap of just assuming that change is going to happen linearly, where we could very well see rapid exponential change. And so trying to anticipate what that change could look like, be it in the form of the potential emergence of a wonder weapon, or as we become more dependent on AI systems, highly autonomous, agentic systems that exploit new vulnerabilities. Trying to anticipate that is so important. So yes, we're in the realm of speculation, but trying to be rigorous in that speculation and anticipate a wide range of futures as opposed to just assuming we're on a linear trajectory is what we're trying to do, because I'm worried that we might miss something and then play catch up once it emerges.
That makes good sense. Thank you both. And I know that there were plenty of questions in the chat that we didn't have time for, and so I'll go back and look through those, just because these sorts of questions and engagements are always helpful for us to consider, so that we know what's on the minds of the participants and people who are part of and sort of following this policy ecosystem. So thank you, Jim and Joel, for the wonderful presentation today and for fielding these questions. And thanks again to the participants for suggesting them. Final closing words in our last few minutes. I did want to make a quick note, and my colleague noted this in the chat at the beginning, but this webinar was being recorded. Before you go, we do have one poll question for you, you being the participants, that will pop up on your screen shortly. The answers will not be visible and will only be seen by the RAND Policy Lab staff. But please take a moment to fill this out if you're able. We're constantly working to bring our audiences the most valuable and engaging content possible, and this poll and your responses help us to do that. There was also one or two of you in the chat who were interested to know how you can follow our work and get involved. And I'd encourage you to subscribe to our RAND Geopolitics of AGI Substack. That link is also in the chat. And to sign up for RAND's Policy Currents newsletter, which delivers the latest research and insights directly to your inbox. And then would also ask you to follow us on your social media platform of choice. That's another great way to keep up with the latest publications, policy labs, and conversations like this, and so on. So all of that should be in the chat. Thank you for your time, and very much hope to see you all at our next policy lab. Thank you.
Thanks.